By the last winter of the 20th century, the neighborhood was already half a ghost. Once, more than 200 families had lived on that quiet stretch of Kamisoshigaya in the western suburbs of Tokyo. But the city had decided to expand the park next door, and one by one it had been buying the families out. House after house had gone dark, then empty, then gone. By December of the year 2000, only 4 households were left standing on that block, and 2 of them belonged to the same family. In one house lived a grandmother. In the house right beside hers lived her daughter, her son-in-law, and their 2 small children. They had a 6-year-old son who struggled with a change, and so, while everyone else moved away, they had waited just a little longer. And that would prove to be the worst decision of their lives. This is the story of the Setagaya family murders. The family's name was Miyazawa. The father, Mikio, was 44 years old. He worked at an international company, a quiet, hard-working man who, in his younger years, had loved the theater and puppetry. His wife, Yasuko, was 41. She had trained as a teacher, and she ran a small cramped school out of the family home, tutoring local children in the evenings. Their daughter, Niina, was 8, a bright and playful girl in the 2nd grade who loved ballet and piano. Their son, Rei, was 6, a gentle child who lived with a developmental disability and a speech impairment, something his parents worried over and were quietly seeking help for. Like everyone else, they had meant to move, but they had given their son a little more time to adjust before uprooting him. In those final weeks, the only real friction in their lives was the noise of young skateboarders who had begun gathering in the empty lots nearby. But this was not going to be an ordinary life for very much longer. On December 30th, 2000, it was a Saturday, the heart of the Japanese New Year holiday. The Miyazawas spent it doing the most ordinary things imaginable. They went out shopping for the holiday. They ate dinner together. They watched television. Sometime that evening, Niina walked next door to visit her grandmother, Haruko, a small, unremarkable moment that would later become the last time anyone outside the family saw any of them alive. Rei slept in his own room on the upper floor, while Yasuko and Niina settled into a loft above it, and Mikio stayed up working. At 38 minutes past 10 o'clock, he logged into a password-protected work email on the family computer. That single action, captured by the machine, is the last thing any member of the Miyazawa family is known to have done. Because somewhere out in the dark, on the empty land around their house, someone was already watching. And within the hour, that someone would be inside. The police would later piece together how he got in. On the side of the house stood a tree close enough to the 2nd floor to climb. The intruder went up it, reached a small bathroom window that had been left unsecured, removed the screen, and slipped inside. He was now on the upper floor of the home, in the dark, while the family slept around him. He had not forced his way in. He had entered quietly from above, in a way that suggested he may have studied the house beforehand. And the first room he came to was the bedroom of the youngest child. The intruder went first to 6-year-old Rei asleep in his bed and strangled him. It is the only one of the 4 killings that night that did not involve a knife, and no one has ever been able to fully explain why the boy was first. The sound of the struggle, or perhaps some instinct, woke Mikio. He rushed toward his son's room, and there, on the upper floor, he met the intruder. And for a moment, the 44-year-old father fought back, and investigators believe he managed to injure the attacker, drawing the man's blood. But the intruder was armed. He had brought with him a long sashimi knife, the kind used to slice fish, and he turned it on Mikio. The struggle was so violent that the blade of the knife snapped, a fragment breaking off inside Mikio's body. Mikio fell and was found the next morning at the bottom of the staircase near the front door. That should have been the moment the killer fled. His weapon was broken, he was bleeding from his own wound, and a man lay dead at his feet. But he did not flee. Instead, he walked into the family's kitchen and he chose a second knife. Upstairs, in the loft, Yasuko and Nina had heard everything. It is believed that they may have pulled the ladder up behind them, trying to seal themselves away from whatever was below. But it was not enough. The intruder reached them and he killed them both. When the police examined the scene, they found that the mother and her 8-year-old daughter had been attacked with a ferocity far beyond what was needed to end a life, and one detective would later say it looked as though the family had been tortured. By the time it was over, every member of the Miyazawa family was dead, and the man who had killed them was still standing inside their home. And here the case becomes something stranger than just a murder, because the intruder did not leave. With 4 people lying dead around him, he stayed inside the house for hours. He went to the kitchen and ate ice cream straight from the freezer, leaving his fingerprints on the packaging. He sat down at the family's computer and used it, even reaching the internet. He went into the bathroom and he used the toilet, and he did not flush it. He tended to the wound on his own hand, leaving behind blood-stained bandages. His own clothing was soaked in blood, so before he left, he took some of Mikio's clothes to wear in its place, and he took roughly 100,000 yen in cash from the home. Then, at some point before dawn, he climbed out and vanished into the empty neighborhood. Because of this bizarre, almost domestic behavior, eating their food, using their things, resting in the home after slaughtering the people in it, the case earned a chilling nickname. People call it the Goldilocks murder. For investigators, though, the killer's calm was something else entirely. It was a gift. Because a man who spends hours moving freely through a house, eating, drinking, bleeding, and resting, leaves a great deal of himself behind. So when the Tokyo Metropolitan Police began processing the home, they realized they were looking at something almost unheard of. This was not a case with too few clues, but one with an overwhelming abundance of them. The killer had left his fingerprints throughout the house. He had left both murder weapons behind. He had left a full sample of his own blood mixed in with that of his victims, which gave investigators a complete genetic profile of the man they were hunting. And he had left his clothing, a hat, a scarf, gloves, a sweatshirt, a small waist pack, and even his shoes. It was, on paper, the kind of evidence that should close a case in a matter of days. And so, Japan launched one of the largest criminal investigations in its history. Over the years, by various estimates, more than 200,000 investigators would work the case. They gathered more than 12,000 pieces of evidence. In an effort so sweeping it was given its own name, officers went door to door across the district, collecting fingerprints from local residents for comparison. They traced the killer's distinctive sweatshirt and found that only around 130 of them had ever been made and sold. They managed to track down 12 of the people who had bought one. Every single one of those 12 had an alibi. And so it went for the entire investigation. Every promising thread followed far enough simply ended. What makes the case so maddening is that the evidence did not just fail to identify the killer. The closer they looked, the stranger the picture became. Take, for example, the killer's DNA. Forensic analysts who studied it concluded, according to widely reported accounts, that the man's ancestry was unusual. His mother's line appeared to trace to southern Europe, possibly the Mediterranean, while his father's line was East Asian. More specifically, investigators reportedly found a marker that is far more common in Korean and Chinese populations than in Japanese ones. It is worth being clear that this kind of analysis is an interpretation, not a certainty. But it did not stand alone. The shoes he left behind were reported to be a brand and size not sold in Japan but sold in South Korea. And then there was the sand. Caught in the folds of his waist pack were grains of sand said to be of a type not found in Japan. Some investigators came to believe that it may have originated thousands of miles away in the southwestern United States. From these scattered details grew one of the case's most enduring theories, that the killer was not Japanese at all, that he may have been a young foreign man, perhaps even someone tied to the American military presence in Japan, who entered that house and then slipped out of the country entirely. It is, after 25 years, still only a theory and not one that has ever been proven. In the spring after the murders, another strange detail surfaced. A small stone Buddhist statue was discovered near the Miyazawa home, a figure of the kind traditionally seen as a guardian of children who have died. No one could say who had left it there or what it meant. But the most consequential turn in the Setagaya story had nothing to do with sand or DNA or statues. It had to do with time. Under Japanese law at the time of the murders, there was a statute of limitations on the crime. If the killer was not caught within a set number of years, he could never be prosecuted at all. By that clock, the case was due to expire in the year 2015. For the family's relatives and for a horrified public, the idea that this killer might simply outlast the law was unbearable. And the Setagaya case became one of the most powerful arguments in a national campaign to change that law. In the year 2010, Japan abolished the statute of limitations for crimes punishable by death. The deadline vanished, and the hunt for the man who murdered the Miyazawa family became something that can now legally never end. 25 years have now passed. The detective who first led the investigation as the local police chief is in his 70s now, long retired, and he still returns to lay flowers at the family's grave. Every year around the anniversary, officers still stand outside of Tokyo train stations and hand out flyers asking anyone who knows something to come forward. They still hold the reward, 20 million yen, the largest in the country's history. And they are now placing their hopes in advances in DNA technology, the same kind of techniques that in recent years have finally cracked other cases once thought hopeless. The house itself still stands, frozen and largely untouched, a quiet monument on a block the city emptied long ago. But for all the evidence, all the years, and all the hundreds of thousands of people who have worked this case, the central questions sit exactly where they were on that New Year's morning. Who was the man who climbed through that window? Why did he choose that family in that empty neighborhood on that particular night? Why would a man kill an entire family and then sit in their home and eat their food and rest among them as if he belonged there? We know almost everything about what he did inside that house. We have his blood, his hands, and his footsteps written into the evidence. We have nearly everything about him except for him. And until that changes, the Miyazawa family waits, and the door the law refused to close stays open in the dark. My name is Jesus Enrique Rosas. I'm the crime coroner. Much love and bliss.